Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to go ahead and add SDL2 to our project. Now SDL stands for Simple Direct Media Layer, and it's basically a layer between the operating system and our piece of software. And it's going to allow us to do things like set up a window and handle input events and other various OS events. So we're going to go ahead and download the development libraries, and since I'm on Windows right now, I'll download the top one here. And once it's downloaded, you'll see you'll get a folder with the entirety of the SDL2 repo in there. Now because I downloaded the Windows version, in our lib folder, and our x64 architecture folder, you'll find .lib and the .dll. The .lib is basically where the entirety of SDL2 resides, and we need this when we're developing the software, when we compile our project. SDL2.dll is what the user will need at runtime, so this is the dynamically linked library. So we're going to actually need both of these. We're also going to need the include files, so that our compiler knows which functions exist within the .lib. So we're going to want to take most of this. We don't really want the documentation. This will tell you how to build this. But for now, we really just want the include in the lib folder. And we'll want this copying.txt as well, because this is like the license file. And you can see like they want us to keep the notice within any project that has it. So we'll keep that in there as well. So looking at just our folder structure right now, we have our Hippo code, which is our Hippo engine library code in here. And we have our Hippo editor, which is just a project that happens to link to our Hippo project. What I want to add here now is an external folder. And this is basically a folder where we're going to have all of our external frameworks and libraries that we're going to use for our project. So within external, I'll create yet another folder. We'll call it SDL2. And in here is where we're going to add SDL2 itself. So again, I want the copying. And instead of dragging these over, I like to have a very particular layout of my folders. So I'm going to just create an include folder and create a lib folder. Within include, this will be the include path for our project. And when I'm writing code, I don't want to just have all of the SDL2 headers available sort of at the base level. I want there to be an SDL2 prefix. So I'm going to add another folder here called SDL2, and it might seem redundant now, but you'll see why we do this. Again, it's for that include piece. And here's where I'll finally have all the include files. So I'm going to go in here. I'm just going to grab every single file and drop them in here. Then I'll back out a couple folders, and in our lib, I'm going to copy the x64 libs here. And I don't need SDL2 main or test. I just need the .lib and .dll. So for now, really all I need is the .lib here. So I'm going to leave that there. And we'll come back for the DLL because we'll need it at runtime. But I don't necessarily want to put it here. It's almost something that should live elsewhere. Like after we're done compiling and creating our executable, we should look somewhere and sort of copy those files over. So again, for now, I'll just take the .lib, which is what we need to compile, and I'll go back to our Hippo folder here. So now that we've got that, I need to include it in our solution so that our code knows where to look for SDL things. So we'll open Premake 5. And at the very top, sort of after we define our workspace, here we define these sorts of values that are used by both projects. I want to do something similar, but a little more extensible. I basically want a section where I can define all of my external dependencies. So I'll just add a quick comment here, external dependencies, and I'll just have externals. And we're writing Lua, so externals we'll define first as a table, and then we can add key value pairs to the table. So we're going to go ahead and add externals at SDL2, and we're going to set equals to external slash SDL2. And basically what I'm doing is now, within this table, I can now refer to it as just SDL2, and it'll have the full path to where that resides. It just makes this a little more extendable in case I want to change the folder structure or do anything like that. I just do it once at the top, and everything else below will use this table. So now that we have that, obviously our Hippo project, our engine, is going to rely on SDL to set up things like Windows. So this needs to know where it is. And if we look at our sys include there's, you can see it includes itself, and now it's also going to include the SDL headers. And the way we do that is similar to how we did project prj.name for project name. That is again just a Lua sort of variable. So we're going to do something similar. We're going to do externals.sdl2, and I just want to add the include. I don't need the Hippo slash. And this is because I want the ability to say externals at SDL2 will give me the root of that directory, and then I can choose if I want the includes or the libs. In this case, I'm going to use externals.sdl2 and to get the include folder from it. Now, Hippo is what's going to sort of obfuscate SDL2 from everybody else, right? It's going to have its own sense of what a window is or what a keyboard event is. It doesn't really matter to the user that SDL is the backend for that stuff. So in order to do that, obviously Hippo needs to know about SDL and needs to know the SDL structure, so that's why we include SDL at the Hippo level, to the Hippo project. However, Hippo Editor as a project doesn't need to know about the includes. It doesn't want to know about the includes. That's the point. It's gonna just interface with Hippo directly. However, Hippo Editor is our actual executable, right? Hippo is just a .lib. It doesn't get linked to anything once it's it gets compiled sort of on its own. All the linking happens when you're actually generating a .exe, right? An actual executable. So even though Hippo Editor doesn't need to know about the includes folder and the intricacies of SDL2, it does actually need to link to it. So for Hippo Editor, we link to Hippo, and we're also going to want to link to SDL2, but we don't have to do it here. We're actually going to have to do it differently depending on the platform that we're on. For example, macOS X likes to use these .frameworks as opposed to .libs, right? And similarly on Linux, you're using a .la or something like that. So we'll leave links Hippo up top here, sort of at the root level, because regardless of platform, we're always going to link to Hippo. But then we'll actually define a further link to SDL2 based on the platform. So the first thing we need to do is sort of within our Windows filter, we have our define, and here we can actually go ahead and add how we're going to link to SDL2 on Windows. And the first thing we need to do is tell it where that .lib is. I'm just going to add a libdirs table, and this is all of the directories where our libraries might exist. So for now, again, it's just externals.sdl2/lib, and that's where our SDL2 library lives, right? And now I'm going to add to that links again, and I'll do this sort of the expanded way because we're going to be linking to multiple things. So for now, it's just SDL2, and I'll do SDL2 in caps because that's what our SDL2.lib file actually is. That's how it's spelled out. So we'll do the same thing. And that's it. That's all we need to do to at least have our code be able to link and find SDL2 for Windows. We'll come back and update this for the other platforms after we get it working on Windows first. So I'm going to save that, and then all I should do is gensln, make sure everything's happy, and it is. It regenerated everything. So now we should be able to actually start using SDL2. At this point, I'm actually going to switch over to Visual Studio, just to spice things up a little bit. So I'll open the solution, and basically just to make sure that we're getting SDL2 working, we just wanted to print out the version of SDL2. SDL provides a function to do that, so that's what we want to do. So if we open up our Hippo project, and again, I like to show all files here, we should have an engine.h, where we have, so these sub and add and get info. Let's remove the sub and add now since we're actually starting to build stuff. And we'll just have an initialize method. Maybe it returns a bool to tell us if it was successful or not. So bool initialize, and then void shutdown. This is basically where we're going to initialize our engine and then shut down our engine, obviously. Switching to our engine.cpp, we'll remove this add that wasn't inline. We'll leave get info there, and we're going to actually add SDL code now. So we need to include it. Include, and I should be able to include SDL2/SDL.h, and you can see IntelliSense does find it, and it does find it because this is part of our include path. So now we can define what bool initialize does. So usually we'll just have a ret equals true, assume everything's happy until unless it's not, we'll return ret. And the way we're going to initialize SDL is with a function call to SDL_init. And SDL_init takes in a flag that defines what we want to initialize. We can initialize everything with SDL_init_everything. This will return something less than 0 if an error occurred. So we'll check against less than 0. And if so, we'll just print out an error. Error initializing SDL2. And just print out the error itself. SDL_getError, we'll do just that. And end the line, and then we'll just return, actually we'll say ret equals false, right? Else, We know everything's been initialized properly, so let's get the version number and we'll print that out. And that will just be enough to tell us that SDL is functional. We can call a function on it. Everything is working. The way you do that is with a function call to SDL_version. It's actually a macro, and it takes in a reference to an SDL version object. So we'll just call it version, and we'll create it up here. So SDL_version version. So this SDL_version macro, well, it expands the stuff, but ultimately it's just going to populate this with the major, minor, and patch version. So then we just print that out. So cout SDL, and then I'll just say version.major. And what is this major? It is a uint8. I think std_cout works with that, so let's do that. And then we'll just put a dot version.minor dot version.patch. End the line. And that's basically all we want from our initialize method, right? If everything was initialized properly, tell us the version of SDL, otherwise give us an error. And similarly, as you initialize SDL, you also have to shut it down. So we'll have our void shutdown method, which we'll just call SDL_quit. And this does all the internal cleanup that SDL needs to do. So the moment of truth, let's go back to our main.cpp. Add and sub are not things anymore. Let's get rid of all of this. We'll keep hello YouTube because that's fun. And then we'll just do a hippo initialize and a hippo followed directly by a hippo shutdown to make sure we shut down SDL before we return. And so what I'm expecting here is to see the version number and shutdown. So let's go ahead and press play, see what this does. And of course, it doesn't run. And that's because SDL2.dll is not in the directory where this is being run from. And obviously it's being run from our bin, debug, hippo editor.exe. So how do we fix that? Let's just put the DLL in there. And so that DLL came from here. We'll go to bin, debug, hippo editor, which is that's where executable lives. So again, our hippo.lib is built into the exe, but our SDL2 is not. And there's a very, very important reason for this. If there's ever an update to SDL2 that just makes something better or fix some critical security bug or whatever it is, we can always just drop in a new SDL2.dll and everything will just work correctly, similarly, but you'll have that patch, you'll have that fix. And this is very important, especially when we're thinking about games on Steam, for example. Steam has their own SDL2.dll that they use. And when you're dynamically linking this, again, that means it's a separate file that can be updated on its own. If we were to statically link it into our exe, just like we did with our hippo lib, then we wouldn't be able to get any of those benefits if there was an update to SDL2.dll, for example. SDL highly recommends that you always dynamically link SDL2, so that's what we're going to do here. So now we should be able to run our project again. And of course it dies because we don't have a system pause. Now, I was adding it and removing it. I didn't want to check it in because it would break the other platforms. But that's exactly what we have, these things like ifdef, hippo, platform, Windows. If we're on Windows, we'll call it system pause. And that's perfect. Now I should be able to run it from here. And here we go. We get emojis as our version numbers and this blank space in the middle. We know we're on 2.0.14, so these must be just what the characters that line up to be, just in ASCII. And that's probably because these are uint8s instead of int32s, basically. So let's try to cast these to int32_key. And run that. And that's better. 2.0.14. There we go. So now we have SDL functional on the Windows side. So that's great. But how do we get it working across all three platforms? This is, after all, a multi-platform project. Well, for that, what I'm going to do is switch over to my VM to get it working on Linux, and then I'll also switch over to my Mac and get it working on Mac. And I just checked in all the code that I did on Windows that you just saw. So I'm going to go ahead and do a git pull origin master. Actually, I think I called it main. I think 4 calls it main by default. So we just pulled everything. Obviously, it's all the SDL2 include files, that copying.txt as well. and the changes that we've done here. So if I just type gensln build sln run, it should fail, and it fails because it doesn't know what SDL_init is. Of course, this makes sense. We haven't linked to it. Our premake5.lua doesn't know about it for Linux environments. So let's just open up code and look at our premake5.lua. So if we just scroll down to Hippo Editor project, you can see for Windows, we've got the libdirs and the links, right? Links to SDL2. So for Linux, we're going to want to do the same thing. Now, the libdirs, we don't really have to define. Usually what you do on Linux is you just install the development libraries to your system, and then you can use them. So that's what we're going to do. So the way you do that is, just clear here, sudo apt install libsdl2-dev. Go ahead and hit enter, put in your password, and it'll actually go ahead and install everything. So that's done, and you can actually see it installed version 2.0.10, not 2.0.14 like we got on Windows. And that's just because that's the latest version that's available in my package manager on my Ubuntu machine. So if we want to make sure that we're using the same version of SDL2 across all of our platforms, so we download the source code and we can build it ourselves. SDL2 actually just recently moved to GitHub. You can go here, copy this, you can clone this to your drive, and you can actually build it manually. And that's exactly what I'm going to do to make sure that we have the right version across all of our platforms. So if I just go back to my libraries folder, where I have SDL, you can see I've actually already installed it because I have built SDL here before. But what you'll have is something similar to this. You won't have a build folder. You actually might look more like this. And if you wanted to compile this from source, I'll just do it again. First you make a build folder, so make dir build cd into it, and then you run configure from the previous folder. Configure. This basically sets up your system to make sure that you've got everything you need in order to properly build it. It's also generating the make files and everything that it requires in order to actually execute that make command. So once it's done, I can actually, if I just ls, you can see I have now a make file in this directory. So I can just type make. And this will just go through and actually build SDL2 from source. And the reason, again, I might want to do this is to make sure that I'm using the right version, regardless of what version is currently available for my depot. And it might have totally been okay to keep using 2.0.10 or whatever came with Ubuntu or whatever might come with your Linux distribution. But again, just for consistency's sake, I want to make sure that I don't get any weird platform-specific bugs that are due to having mismatching SDL2 libraries. And now that it's done, we can actually run make install. And I'm going to get permission denied to do sudo make install. And you can see this is going to copy all the SDL2 libraries, like libsdl2.la, which is what we need to link to it at compile time, into our user local folder. So now switching back to our Hippo folder, I should be able to CLI gensln, I don't have to gensln again, we'll just build sln, and it should actually compile this time, and you can see that it does. And that was very quick, so I just deleted the folder, the bin obj folder, and forced it to do it again to make sure that I could see the output. And you can see that it did build everything. So now if I CLI run, there we go. You can see that we are using the same version as on Windows, SDL2.0.14. Now onto Mac. So I'm remoted into my Mac side now, and you can see I've synced up. So I checked in that SDL2 change that we just did on the Linux side, and I've synced to it. And I now want to, again, repeat the process for the Mac side. So if we just go back to that SDL homepage, you can see I can download this DMG for macOS X development libraries, which I've already done. And it has a README and a license, so again, we have the license. It should be the same as that copying.txt, which it is. And that's already part of our project. If we look at the README, it tells us exactly what to do with this SDL2.framework, which is, again, the way that Mac actually deals with these sort of libraries. And to install, we just copy the SDL2.framework to library frameworks. So I have done that already. So from here, I'll just try to gensln build sln run, and it does. In this case, gensln permission denied for premake5. So sure, chmod +x premake / premake5. Let's try that again. You can see it gens properly. The build fails because the non-portable path to SDL2. So this is really interesting. we've just come across our first Mac OS X specific bug. SDL2, the folder that we added for our include path, is lowercase in our code, but it looks like it should be uppercase. And can we confirm that? So if we go to external, SDL2, include, SDL2 is lowercase. That's interesting. Mac it thinks it should be uppercase. Let's go ahead and fix that. It's a little weird because it is lowercase for sure. But if we just rename this to SDL2, all caps, because we definitely want to make sure it's consistent, then we'll just update the code to access this via all caps SDL2, and that should fix this problem. So again, I can just run code dot to open up Visual Studio Code here, and we'll just go to the file where this error occurs, which is engine.tpp. So hippo source engine.tpp. And I'll just make this SDL2 all caps. Let's try that now. You can see this time that build works against that engine.tpp, but the link fails. And it fails because it doesn't know what SDL_getError links to. Again, we have the include, so we know how to compile that code. We just can't figure out what that function is or where it lives at link time. And that's fine. That's because we haven't told it how to link to SDL2 yet. So we'll go to our premake5.lua, and again, just like every other platform, we'll have our links, except this time for Mac, and it will link to SDL2.framework. So now that we've got that, if we try to run it, you can see it properly generates, builds, and runs the solution. Now on my Mac, I actually have 2.0.12 installed, so again, I could go ahead and upgrade that to 2.0.14. But the point is that we now properly know how to link our Mac project to SDL2. And now you can see that we've got SDL2 working across all 3 different platforms. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching.